we as Black people are not placed in the future. The world that's projected in Blade Runner looks nothing like our world. Women and women of color are also in the future, and we're also in positions of power in the future. And that is exactly why we've done the movie Brown Girl Begins.
No matter how boar hide under sheep's wool, and grunt still betray him.
Translation.
The world of Brown Girl Begins, the film, all the wealthy have fled to downtown Toronto. There's no electricity, there's no water, there's no politicians. And the poor have been marginalized and sent to an island.
Hey, what's the rule? We don't steal from anyone that helps us.
The whole political idea of Afrofuturism stems all the way back from the 60s and the 70s and the nationalist movement in terms of how do we bring Africa to where we are, and how do we think about Africa, the motherland, in a futuristic kind of way. For me, Afrofuturism is much more simple. It's more, how are we going to see Black people in the future? And how can we place Black people in the future? So for me, when I did Brown Girl Begins, it was all about placing a young, Black, Caribbean woman in the future in a position of power. If we're looking back and we're looking at Black History Month, we're looking at us in terms of our shared experience in a position of oppression and revolution and fighting back, but mostly the mainstream tends to look at us in oppression. And Afrofuturism for me is a movement that looks at us as a movement of putting ourselves in the future, not depending on anybody else, and in a position of power.
I don't want to kill a chosen one. I want to give you the power that you were meant to have.
Then give me the power to see.
My idea of what it'll be like for artists in the future, Black artists in the future in Toronto, is that we're still going to have the same challenges of racism and sexism, in the sense that those barriers aren't going to disappear, because then I would be talking about a fantasy, and I deal with sci-fi, not fantasy. But what I do think is that there will be more stories and more access to those stories than we have now. And I think that the idea of multiple identities in the Black community, rather than one monolithic African-American stereotype Black identity, there'll be multiple and diverse identities that are accepted.
That's all you got, baby girl?
I think if I had seen this film when I was growing up, that it wouldn't have taken me so long to think it was okay to tell my stories.